Jenny Miller didn't mean to start a revolution with a plate of pancakes. She only meant to keep a quiet boy from being hungry. And on the morning 4 black SUVs rolled into the gravel lot outside Rosie's diner, she still had warm syrup on her fingers and the ache of an empty booth in her chest. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. The first sound of the day at Rosie's was the hiss of the griddle waking up, spitting like a cranky old cat. The second was the jukebox coughing itself into whatever country station it could grasp with the weak radio signal from Topeka. Then came Jenny's footsteps, soft, familiar, a rhythm woven into the dawn, the tire-worn rubber soles of her shoes crossing scuffed linoleum toward the front windows. If you arrived early enough, you could see her silhouette behind the glass as she wiped away the fog, revealing a street lined with sleeping storefronts and the promise of dry wind that turned prairie dust into gold. Rosie's diner had wedged itself gently between the hardware store and the laundromat for 46 years, and had never demanded more attention than a heartbeat demands from a body. People lived their lives around it. Bonnie, Rosie's daughter, had named every ash-blonde ponytail that swung through the door after a song. Mark, the manager, had a system of counting napkins to make sure no one stole any. Harold took his same stool with the same sigh at the same minute every morning, thumbing the edge of the counter like a habit that kept his heart going. Jenny, 29, tied a faded blue apron around her waist at 5:45 sharp, sponged down booths the color of red summer tomatoes, and poured coffee that steamed the edges of her glasses. People thought they knew her. She was the woman with a warm smile that never reached the dark corners behind her eyes. The waitress who remembered an order after hearing it once, who refilled your cup as if you were thirsty for more than caffeine. She lived alone in a one-bedroom above the pharmacy where the bell over the door chimed until midnight. Her family photos, yellowed and soft around the edges, leaned against a chipped mirror on her dresser. A father in an army medic uniform with kind eyes despite the desert heat backdropping his smile. A mother with laughter lines and a half-completed quilt in her lap. Her father had died when she was 15, car accident, they said, but what she remembered was the stillness that followed. Her mother followed quieter 2 years later, leaving Jenny with an aunt who loved her enough to write letters from Arizona when her fingers weren't too swollen from the arthritis to hold a pen. Jenny walked to work because the world felt too big from behind a steering wheel. She had a way of moving through routines like someone climbing a ladder in the dark, trusting the next rung would be there because it had been yesterday. Routines kept her safe, kept her life the same shape, kept the hurt where it belonged. Until the boy, he started showing up on a Tuesday, early October, when the cottonwood leaves tossed yellow confetti down the sidewalks, and a stray dog slept curled beneath the laundromat dryer's hum. He was small for 10, if that was what he was, narrow shoulders under a jacket held together by faith and thread, a backpack too big for his frame slumped beside him like a tired companion. He sat in the back corner booth, the one farthest from the door, eyes careful and measuring, taking in the entire room with a glance that looked like nothing and everything at once. "Morning," Jenny said on that first day, placing a glass of water on his table, slipping a paper straw out of its wrapper with the quiet reverence of someone offering something more than it was. He nodded, a movement so slight it might have been a trick of light. When she came back around, his book was open, some worn hardcover with the library stamp rubbing off the spine, and he was sipping the water like it was a strategy. He left at 7:55 exactly, 3 blocks and 45 minutes before the school bell, with a small thank you that seemed to cost him a great deal. He returned the next day. Same time, same booth, same order, water. The third day, Jenny watched the way his eyes tracked the plates that left the kitchen, pancakes like golden suns, eggs piled like mountains, bacon curling like strips of autumn leaves drying. He watched and didn't watch. She recognized that look. It lived in the hollow of a stomach and the center of a throat, and it said, "Don't ask me anything because my answers are too sharp to chew." By the second week, she knew his rhythm better than the jukeboxes. 7:15 in, eyes flicker over everything, book open, a finger hidden between pages to hold his place, water sipped slowly. 7:55 out, a nod that pretended it was gratitude and not a plea. On the 15th day, her hands slipped. At least that was how she rehearsed it later. We had an extra, she said, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. Butter pooled in melting islands, syrup shone like amber. Kitchen made a mistake. She kept her face neutral, her voice light, like it truly didn't matter whether he ate or not. Suspicion flickered quick and squirrel fast. He looked up at her as if he wanted to look away. Hunger drew a hard line down his cheekbones. Better to eat it than throw it away, right? She murmured, and walked off before he could say no and make it a rule. When she returned 10 minutes later, there was nothing left but the sheen of syrup and a neat stack of the napkins he'd used to wipe the plate clean. His eyes were on his book, but she saw what he wouldn't let show, a looseness around his shoulders that hunger never allowed. "Thank you," he whispered. It became a ritual no one acknowledged. Next day, accidental scrambled eggs and toast. The day after, oatmeal with brown sugar that clung to the spoon like a promise. When the mornings turned colder and the wind slid like a blade down Main Street, she added hot chocolate with a swirl of whipped cream that made him blink in surprise. He never asked for anything. She never asked him why. His gratitude was precise, his silence even more so. "Who's that kid you keep serving?" Harold finally asked, eyes tracking her as she balanced a tray of 4 coffee mugs in her right hand and a plate of biscuits in the other. "Don't know," she said, and meant more than the surface of the words. Never seen a parent with him. Harold's gaze drifted toward the boy, softening with something like memory, skinny as a fishing pole. "Yes," she said, because what else could she say? "He's hungry." In the back, Kathy, the grill cook whose kindness was buried in sarcasm and cigarettes, cornered Jenny while the bacon hissed. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly, but with a practical sorrow of someone who'd gotten tired of trying to fix the world with a butter knife. "You give handouts, they never learn gratitude. He'll disappear one day, they always do." Jenny didn't argue, because arguing with Kathy was like arguing with the wind. It pushed back out of habit. "It's fine. I used to be that hungry too." It was the most personal sentence she'd spoken aloud to anyone at Rosie's in 3 years. Not everyone ignored the unspoken exchange. There are many ways to be cruel, and some of them wear suits. A regular businessman with a tie knotted like an accusation watched the corner booth like it was a scandal. "Playing charity worker on company time," he said one morning, voice pitched to reach the ears that wanted it. "Bad precedent. Maybe it's a good one," Harold muttered without looking up. Another morning, an old-timer scraped his knife against toast and shook his head. "Kids these days expect handouts. In my day, no one gave away free food just because someone looked sad." Jenny learned early that defending kindness too loudly can harden the hearts it should soften. She let the comments slide off like rain, pooling somewhere she didn't need to mop yet. She watched the boy instead. He stopped flinching every time the bell over the door jingled. He held her gaze for a second longer each morning when she set down a plate. Sometimes he smiled, a shy, sideways thing. It felt like being trusted by a wild thing just enough to be allowed to set down the offering and step back. Mark noticed. Managers always do. He called her into the office one morning, sweat shining under his receding hairline despite the bite in the air. "Jen," he said, tapping a pen against his desk like an anxious rhythm, "I can't have you giving away food. It's bad for business." "I'll cover the cost." She twisted her apron ties in her hands. "From my tips," he scoffed. "Your tips barely cover your rent. It's my choice." Something in her voice stood up, unafraid. The part of her that remembered counting coins to see if she could afford bread and bus fare in the same week. Mark looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to fight or fold. He sighed long, like letting out an old version of himself. "1 meal a day, you cover it. If there's trouble, it stops." "Thank you," she said, and walked back through the steam and sizzle with a lighter step. That night she emptied tips on her kitchen table, smoothing crumpled bills with the patience of a packer folding a parachute. She put aside enough to cover a plate and a glass and a cup. A winter coat could wait. The tooth that twinged when she chewed on the right side would keep. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after the diner closed, she took down a small wooden box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside lay the anchor of her heart, a faded photograph of her father in his medic uniform, sleeves rolled, smile gentle, and a small leather journal, pages thin as onion skins and soft with worry. She opened to a page dog-eared so many times it had learned the shape of her thumb. "Shared a half ration with a local boy today. Johnson said I was crazy, that he might sell our position for a slice of bread. Maybe." But the look in that kid's eyes when he ate, It was the same look I had when Mom saved the last piece for me during the hard years. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget to share stay hungry their whole lives. His words were an old rope across a new river. She held tight. The boy began arriving at 7:12 some mornings, as if the extra 3 minutes were something he could afford. Jenny started leaving the plate in the pass window with a sticky note that said mistake order, so even if anyone looked they'd find a story to believe. She kept his water glass full, topping it off as if she were tending a plant that needed more than sunlight. She never asked his name. Some questions operate like scissors, they sever. She wanted this to be a place where nothing cut. Then, as the first frost scraped the grass silver, he didn't come. She made the pancakes anyway, set them in his booth. The steam turned into fog that swirled and disappeared. She wiped her hands and waited for the bell to cry out over the door. It didn't. She found reasons to pass his booth every 6 minutes, like checking the pulse of an empty bed. The pancakes went cool. Even Kathy didn't say anything, only shook her head when the lunch rush hit, and she had to slap burgers over the plate she'd wanted to send to the dish pit. Jenny wrapped the pancakes and carried them upstairs that night like a small funeral. He didn't show the next day, or the next. After a week, worry turned into something heavier. Had her quiet been kindness or negligence? Was he hurt, caught, taken? The mind is a cruel storyteller when it wants to be. Someone started taking photos. She caught a woman at the counter angling her phone toward the empty booth with the untouched plate, mouth pinched to a line of judgment. The next day, Jenny learned why. A local Facebook group posted the picture with a caption that curled like smoke. Rosie's Diner now serving invisible charity cases. The comments sank like stones. Publicity stunt. Feeding strays only creates dependency. That waitress needs a reality check. Next time a strange kid approaches, remember this, you're being set up. She told herself the internet wasn't a town. It was an echo chamber for shouts you'd be embarrassed to say without the cover of a screen. But the words threaded into her late-night quiet and tightened. She washed dishes in water that steamed her hands raw and made herself read her father's journal again. The leather glowed amber under the lamp. She traced the writing with her finger. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf. Those who forget to share stay hungry their whole lives. When you've been hungry, you learn a certain stubbornness. You learn that kindness with conditions knots itself into a leash, and not everyone can bear to be tethered. Jenny slept with the journal on her nightstand like a lighthouse within reach. On the morning of his 23rd absence, Jenny arrived at Rosie's with her hope trimmed down to the fiber. She still checked the door at 7:15 out of muscle memory. She still set down a plate of pancakes in the corner booth because you don't stop opening your hands just because the thing you love doesn't arrive. 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9. At 9:17, the diner exhaled in a hush that started at the door and ran like a chill across the room. The bell jingled, then stuttered, as if it couldn't decide whether to be brave. 4 black SUVs rolled into the gravel lot like a tide coming in. Government plates flashed in the weak morning sun. Doors opened in synchronized thumps. Uniformed men and women stepped out, boots landing in switches of dust. The lead SUV gave birth to a man whose presence walked ahead of his body, tall, lines carved by heat and cold around his eyes, medals pinned across his chest like chapters of a book no one wanted to read but everyone respected. Mark smoothed his tie with hands that trembled and emerged from the back like a man walking into a sudden storm. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked. His voice cracked around the edges like ice breaking. The officer removed his cap, the motion crisp, the weight of the moment bending the air between them. "I'm looking for a woman who works here, Jenny Miller." Chairs creaked, forks hovered. Even the jukebox tried to disappear into itself. Jenny felt the weight of 100 eyes spin toward her and stick. The coffee pot she was holding was suddenly too heavy. She set it down before it betrayed her tremor. "I'm Jenny," she said, voice steadier than the way her heart rattled like a window in the wind. He stepped forward, Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out an envelope crisp enough to have edges. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men." Jenny's throat closed. I don't understand. Is this about?" She thought of the boy, of the empty booth with the pancakes cooling, of words on the internet that turned kindness into a weapon. "Is he okay?" "He's safe," the colonel said. Something in his voice softened, the way steel warmed by sunlight might give off a glow. He's with his grandparents in Colorado, but for almost 3 months he came here every morning before school. Jenny's stomach dropped and broke against something sharp. Adam, she said, the name arriving from nowhere or maybe from a place in her that saved names for later. Adam Thompson, the colonel nodded. His father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the finest soldiers I've had the honor to lead. Was. The word hit the floor between them with the weight of a plate shattering. Colonel Reeves didn't flinch from it. What Sergeant Thompson didn't know when he left on his last deployment was that his wife would leave shortly after. She abandoned the boy. He let the ugliness sit naked, the way truth sometimes has to. Adam was too proud and too afraid of being taken from his home to tell anyone. He stretched the emergency fund his father left, ate sparingly, did what he could to keep anyone from looking too closely. A low sound rose from somewhere at the counter. Harold's hands gripped his coffee cup so hard his knuckles went bloodless. Someone's fork clinked against a plate and no one moved to pick it up. Colonel Reeves held out the envelope. Master Sergeant Thompson fell in Afghanistan 2 months ago. His voice didn't lose its discipline. In his final letter, he wrote that if anything happened to him, we were to find the woman who fed his son without questions and tell her she saved the dignity of a soldier's boy. The letter was read at his memorial. He cleared his throat, eyes steady. He said his son wrote about you in every other letter, said the pancakes tasted like mornings before his father left, said you never asked him why he was alone, just fed him. Jenny took the envelope with hands that didn't feel connected to her body. The paper was cool. The ink smelled faintly of grief, or maybe that was imagination. She slid out the letter and saw a hand, square and patient, marching across the page. She didn't let herself read yet. If she read, she might break. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, Colonel Reeves said, stepping back. On behalf of Master Sergeant Thompson, and most importantly on behalf of Adam, thank you. He snapped to attention and saluted. It was not the sort of salute people throw around on holidays. It was precise, heavy with meaning, full of the understanding that sometimes the bravest act is to show up every morning and set a plate down without demanding the story first. Behind him, every uniformed soldier in the diner and outside by the SUVs followed suit in a choreography that had been rehearsed on fields and mountains, in deserts and in storms. Customers stood. Those who had mocked Jenny's kindness felt the shape of their shame and stood anyway. Jenny stood very still and felt an entire version of herself unclench. She thought of the boy's chipped fingernails lifting the fork. She thought of the way he squared his shoulders before he said thank you, as if gratitude required bravery. She thought of her father's words pressed into a thin page she had held so often the paper had learned her pulse. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf. I didn't know, she managed, the edges of her voice scraped raw by miracle. I just couldn't let him be hungry. Sometimes that's enough, the colonel said. Sometimes it's everything. The bell over the door swayed gently as wind threaded in. A napkin drifted from the counter to the floor like a flag lowering. The moment held, then released. Conversation started again, softer this time. Coffee did what coffee does, found hands and warmed them. In the days that followed, Rosie's Diner became a place people drove out of their way to find. The same Facebook group that had held up Jenny's kindness like a joke now shared the story with contrition threaded through the comments. My son is in the Navy. People like you keep us upright. Thank you for reminding us what matters. A man in a suit came in, folded his tie into his pocket like surrender, left a heavy tip and no name. Mark hung a small American flag above the corner booth and tucked a plaque beneath it that said, reserved for those who serve and the families who wait. He didn't announce it. He just polished the plaque 3 times a week with the same rag he used to wipe the cash register. Harold, who never bought more than coffee and toast, slipped a $20 under his half-eaten biscuit one morning. When Jenny tried to hand it back, he shook his head and said, for the plate when I needed one. On the 7th day after the colonel, a manila envelope arrived addressed to Jenny in careful block letters. Inside was notebook paper with words written in a hand trying very hard to be adult. Dear Miss Jenny, I didn't know your name until that day the colonel came, but every morning you looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Dad always said real heroes don't wear capes, they wear the uniform. I still think he's right, but I think sometimes heroes wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world forgot us. You remembered me every day even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. That made it possible to remember myself. Grandma and Grandpa are nice. Grandpa is teaching me to fish. I still don't like worms, but I like how the water looks in the early morning. Grandma makes good cookies. I miss my dad. Sometimes I miss your pancakes too. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer them. Your friend Adam Thompson, P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending after all. Jenny framed the letter and hung it behind the counter, not near the register where everyone would see and praise, tucked in the corner where she could glance at it after a long shift and remember the shape of a choice that felt small and turned out not to be. Word spread beyond the town. Soldiers passing through in uniform stopped by for coffee and left unit patches on the counter, their edges catching the light. A bulletin board bloomed behind the register, Special Forces insignias, coins heavy with meaning, notes scrawled on the backs of napkins. A ranger's coin, a patch from a medic company with a red cross at its heart, a Marine Semper Fi pin, a handwritten note from a chaplain. Every day someone isn't hungry because you choose not to be. Rosie's became a place where stories braided together. One afternoon, a school bus unloaded a flock of 8-year-olds with scuffed sneakers and questions spilling out of their mouths. An earnest girl with pigtails and pink barrette sat in Jenny's section and watched her move like a comet around the room. My dad says you're a hero, she said, matter of fact, small hands flat on the table. Do you feel like one? Jenny crouched so their eyes met. The girl smelled like crayons and rain. No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry. Not just for food, the teacher, tired kind, carrying her own invisible armful, heard and nodded. Hunger comes in lots of forms, she said softly, like finishing a lullaby. Food is just the easiest to see. When the fundraiser came, because of course it did, because grief had taught the town to do more than cluck tongues, Jenny and Mark didn't plan speeches. They set up a jar at the register that said, in plain black marker, Emergency Fund for Children of Deployed Parents. Donations slid into it like rain in a drought, quiet and necessary. Mark matched the total from the diner's savings without the fanfare he'd once reserved for his own name on the specials board. My old man fed every stray kid on our block, he said to Ginny one night, counting singles that smelled like pockets and steel. Drove my mother crazy, never understood it. Watching you, maybe it's the first thing about him that makes sense. The Kansas summer arrived like it always did. Sudden, hot, unapologetic. Everything slowed down except the sound of cicadas and the rhythm of state troopers pulling people over for thinking straight roads invited speed. Rosie's added lemon slices to the water pitchers and dragged fans out from the back closet. The booth under the flag rarely sat empty. An older woman with a photo tucked into her wallet sat there one afternoon, running her thumb over the edges of the picture as if she could smooth time. A young man with a buzz cut and a scar he didn't look at ordered a BLT and left without finishing it, walls lowering enough for Jenny to slide him a piece of pie and say, "On the house," without making it a big deal. A teenager with a screaming baby and no ring ate a stack of pancakes and cried into her coffee, and nobody asked why. Almost a year after the morning of the SUVs, Jenny arrived before dawn to find something small and heavy tucked beside her order pad. A challenge coin, one side the arrowhead and dagger of the Special Forces insignia, the other custom engraved, Semper Memor, always remembering. She stepped outside into the bruised blue light of pre-sunrise and scanned the street. Sprinklers ticked on. A dog shook itself awake. No one waited. She slipped the coin into her apron pocket. Its weight pressed against her thigh with every step, a reminder in metal of a promise made in pancakes. That evening, after the last check was paid and the sign flipped from open to closed, Mark strolled to the window with a cardboard rectangle under his arm and a hammer in his hand, trying to look like someone who used these tools for more than 10 minutes at a time. He lined the sign up with the frame and hammered in small nails with surprising tenderness. Jenny leaned on the counter and watched. The sign was simple, black letters on white. Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry. He turned and found her looking at him with that expression people wear when they recognize a miracle in someone they'd almost given up on. "New policy," he said, his hands shoving into his pockets the way boys do when they feel both sheepish and proud. Figured it was time. No speeches, no hashtags, just a quiet recalibration of what mattered. On her way home, Ginny cut through the alley behind the laundromat where warm air tumbled out of the vents in a sigh. The sky looked washed clean, a coin dipped in blue ink and polished to a shine. She touched the coin in her pocket like some people touch a cross, or a talisman, or a promise half-spoken and fully believed. She thought of Adam on a lake in Colorado, worms wriggling in a tin can while he learned how to wait. She thought of his father, who had understood what it meant to share even when sharing cost more than bread. She thought of a boy sitting in a corner booth, eating pancakes as if doing so allowed the world to make a little bit of sense. Grief doesn't leave, it changes its shoes. At home, she pulled the wooden box down and opened it. Her father's handwriting looked back at her from a war far away and a kitchen table very close. She laid the challenge coin beside the journal, metal and leather touching like old friends. She did not weep. The kind of tears she felt were not for spilling. They were for carrying, like stones around a garden bed, holding the shape of something worth tending. The town returned to its rhythms. The diner doors opened and closed, opened and closed. Strangers became regulars. Regulars remembered their better selves. When someone near the back started to tell the story, because stories like this asked to be retold, Jenny would let it ride and wander to the window and watch a father in a faded ball cap braid his daughter's hair while waiting for the pancakes. She watched for 7:15 each morning out of habit, even though she knew the boy wasn't coming, and that was precisely what she had hoped for, safety somewhere else, the kind that made return unnecessary. Sometimes, when the light fell through the windows in a late afternoon slant that made everything look like a photograph of itself, she'd slide a plate of pancakes into the corner booth and whisper, "Same as always, honey," because memory is a hungry thing too, and feeding it can be holy. Harold would see and pretend he didn't. Kathy would grunt from the grill and slide her own finger under the edge of her sleeve where a small tattoo of a name lived, faded and private. Mark would wipe the counter and hum poorly as if he knew how to carry a tune. Life went on. It always does, with or without our permission. It doesn't take much to change its direction. A plate, a fork, a refusal to ask questions whose answers could destroy what's fragile. A letter from a father whose last thought was to thank a stranger who saw his son not as a problem, but as a person. 4 black SUVs, and a salute that stitched a small-town waitress into a fabric far larger than she'd ever asked to be part of. She had spent years learning how to live with less so she wouldn't have to ask for more. And then the world told her what she had given, quietly, without a receipt, was the very thing it had needed. On a day that looked like any other, under a sky that would have been blue without her noticing, Jenny took a deep breath that felt like the opposite of hunger. She pressed her palm to the coin in her pocket and felt, against her skin, the cool certainty of the words. Semper memor, always remembering. Always and everywhere, someone walks into a diner before school with a book in a backpack and bravery in their bones. Always and everywhere, a plate appears not because someone deserves it, but because someone needs it. Always and everywhere, kindness doesn't ask questions first. It puts down the fork. It passes the syrup. It waits by an empty booth as if waiting were a prayer. You might drive past Rosie's someday and not recognize it as anything other than a place with cheap coffee and a jukebox stubborn about its stations. You'll miss the plaque. You'll miss the letter framed in the corner. You'll miss the way a waitress glances at the door at 7:15 and smiles at a ghost who taught her, and a town and a line of soldiers what to do with their hunger. But if you go in and sit down, if you look into the faces around you, you might feel it. A thread running through the room that ties you briefly to everyone else. You might leave lighter than you arrived. And if you happen to be a 10-year-old in a seat too big for you, book open, eyes careful, you'll find pancakes in front of you before you ask. No story required. No explanation demanded. Just the grace of being known by the shape of your need. It won't make the losses disappear. It won't bring back fathers. It won't even quiet every cruel comment. But it will do what matters most on the mornings when the world feels cold and the wind cuts through all the layers you have. It will keep you from being hungry. It will tell you softly, in butter and syrup and warmth, that you have not been forgotten. And sometimes, maybe most times, that is the difference between disappearing and staying alive long enough for the ending to change.